Welcome to the debate. We are deep into the endgame of Big Brother US 27, and we're focused squarely on the final three, Morgan Pope, Vince Pinaro, and Ashley Hollis. The tension this week is just enormous because, well, the entire season really hinges on one final strategic decision. The central question before us is critical. If Morgan wins that final head of household, what is the single strategically superior choice? Is it taking Vince, her dominant, four-time HOH ally, or is it cutting him to take Ashley?
Yeah, and that final choice, it really defined the player's legacy. It's arguably the most important move of the entire season.
Absolutely, and my position is, I think, pretty clear. Morgan must take Ashley. It is the unassailable strategic choice, the one that guarantees victory. You leverage Ashley's significantly weaker competition resume for what should be a comfortable win. I mean, why take a risk when you can secure the cash?
See, I come at it from a slightly different angle. I believe Morgan's focus really needs to be on jury management, maybe above all else right now. That path of maximum strategic safety, cutting your clear partner, that's often the path of maximum jury bitterness. Taking Vince is a choice that honors their shared game, it minimizes the inevitable backlash for a final, cold betrayal, and ultimately it solidifies the season narrative they built together as the defining duo.
Okay, I see why you think the personal element is so potent, but let me give you a different perspective. This one's rooted purely in risk management and demonstrable data from the season. Morgan has to prioritize the safest, most lucrative path to the $500,000. Ashley, she has only one competition win. She has played what is pretty universally recognized as a scrappy survival game rather than a dominant one.
Respectable for staying afloat, certainly. But yeah, not a game that commands respect from a really competitive jury. I can conceive that point.
Precisely. The general assessment seems to be that the jurors just don't respect Ashley's gameplay, especially not in comparison to Morgan's dominant 7-win competition streak. So this makes Morgan versus Ashley a potential landslide victory. And moreover, against Ashley, Morgan avoids the most difficult task in the final two, the rhetorical gymnastics required to differentiate her contribution from Vince's. Against Ashley, Morgan can pretty much claim all the strategic moves made by their duo without facing Vince's counterargument about his 4 HOH wins and, running the pre-jury game.
That's a compelling argument about the difficulty of the final speech, I'll give you that. But I think you dramatically underestimate the weight of their partnership. Morgan's game is, as the source material says, so intertwined with Vince's. They didn't just align, they were the power couple. They openly talked about their dynamic as the Tyler and Casey of Big Brother 27. Cutting Vince at this final moment, after sharing a bed for weeks and engaging in these intensely coded conversations about their future, that would be seen as a major, cold, and calculated betrayal.
Calculated, yes, but cold, only if the jury values that relationship over raw gameplay. And I think certain key swing votes absolutely do. This risks serious backlash from jurors who value loyalty and relationship integrity. I'm thinking specifically about Lauren here. Lauren was, as noted, burned by Vince many times, but she always kept going back. That attachment, it suggests she places a really high value on the connection. She might reward the duo who followed through to the end, over the person who ruthlessly discarded her partner purely for the money.
But okay, even if we accept the risk is real, does that make the integrity argument more important? I'd say no. You're relying on that early prediction that Morgan wins against Vince 4-3, and I argue that 4-3 is just too volatile. If she keeps Vince, she has to fight for every single vote, knowing that a single flip, perhaps if Kelly votes for Vince out of respect for his competition wins, which is possible, sends the money the other way.
Right, but that's where the numbers become the mechanism of betrayal, potentially. By keeping Vince, Morgan ensures that Juror 7 is either Ava or Ashley. Now, the analysis predicts that both Ava and Ashley would vote for Morgan over Vince 100%. That vote stabilizes Morgan's necessary majority, ensuring she can maybe lose a loyalty vote or two to Vince and still secure the win. If she cuts him, the final vote against Ashley is easy, yes, but it risks her being perceived as a different, maybe less honorable player altogether by that jury.
I'm not convinced by the idea that Vince is the honorable narrative choice. mostly because we have to look closely at the integrity of Vince's game itself. You focus on the betrayal of Morgan cutting Vince, but what about Vince's betrayal of everyone else? Vince has made some egregious errors, leading people on, blindsiding key allies like Kelly, and maybe more devastatingly, Keanu.
Oh, the Keanu blindside that was a terrible move. He shared highly sensitive personal information with Keanu to build this intense bond, guarantee her trust, only to turn around and ruthlessly evict her the very next week.
Exactly. And that degree of calculated personal cruelty, regardless of his partnership with Morgan, gives the jury ample reason to vote personally against Vince. Kelly is already irritated enough at Vince to vote personally after he targeted her. Vince caused many of his own problems by lying unnecessarily and often confusing the jury with his shifting alliances. Morgan just has a much cleaner slate in terms of general house conduct, so why risk facing the messy player who still holds 4 HOH titles when you can guarantee facing the weak resume?
Because you only guarantee that, say, 6-1 win if Ashley truly has no case to present. And we have to assess Ashley's true threat level, which I believe is massively underestimated simply because she lacks the comp wins.
Okay, fair point. That 6-1 prediction against Ashley may not be quite as safe as it appears on the surface. I agree that Ashley isn't seen as a dominant player in the comp sense, but the sources explicitly state she is highly influential.
Yeah, we can't just dismiss the secret lawyer in the house label. It's not about physical dominance with her, it's about rhetorical dominance. Ashley has been doing a good job on Morgan, and you can tell it's caused Morgan to question sticking with Vince, which demonstrates superb persuasive skills, even against the season's powerhouse player.
You're right. Her persuasive skills are excellent. If she makes it to the final two, her speech won't focus on HOH trophies. It'll focus on social maneuvering, on survival. She could effectively frame Morgan's game as maybe predictable brute force, winning comps mainly when she was on the block, while framing her own game as complex social strategy, surviving week after week without immunity.
And she has the ability to argue a case. She could potentially turn that scrappy survival label into a compelling narrative of resilience. She could ask the jury, look, who had the harder path? The one who could veto themselves every week or the one who had to convince the HOH to keep them safe every single week? Target. But Morgan already sees Ashley as someone whose game isn't respected by the jury, referring to it as scrappy survival. If Morgan takes Ashley, she makes her pass seem almost too easy, potentially reducing the perceived magnitude of her overall achievement. It's hard to stand up and argue you beat the strongest competitor when you've just ruthlessly cut the other dominant player in the final hours. I think Morgan has to preserve the integrity of the alliance to claim the full magnitude of their shared success.
But if Morgan is truly the comp beast, the dominant player, why would she need to beat the perceived biggest threat in the final two? Wouldn't eliminating him at final three prove her strategic clarity and dominance even more emphatically? I'd say if Morgan cuts Vince, she proves her independence and dominance precisely because she eliminated the biggest threat and proved she wasn't just orbiting him.
That assumes the jury sees her as independent, though. If Morgan cuts Vince, she risks validating the narrative that she was essentially Vince's understudy for the first half of the game. Let's not forget, Vince ran much of the pre-jury game. He set the tone, handled many of those early eliminations. The power rankings even noted that Vince's claim to greatness is more complicated than Morgan's, which suggests that while Morgan clearly surpassed him late with her competition prowess, Vince still has a strong, if messy, case to present about their shared game ownership and that initial strategic framework. By cutting him, she might make herself look like she feared his ability to articulate that very case.
I would argue the opposite, and I think the evidence supports this. Morgan is the season's undisputed comp beast. 7 wins total, including 5 vetoes in a row, and that critical Final Four HOV veto sweep. She's ranked number 1 because she demonstrably steered Vince's game whenever it benefited her. I mean, think about the Final 5. Morgan convinced Vince to target a specific ally to secure her own long-term safety, even though Vince had initial reservations. That showed strategic control.
Strategic control within the relationship, yes. But eliminating Vince undermines the story.
Look, the story is secondary to the 500K. Cutting Vince, the person she's been orbiting in the house's narrative, proves her own agency and independence in the clearest possible terms. Keeping Ashley, the underdog, simply highlights Morgan's overwhelming control and unbeatable resume in a low-risk environment. It's the move that secures the cash, full stop. You just don't take a 4-3 toss-up when a dominant win is sitting right there on the table.
But this specific jury might just punish that cold calculus. We really can't underestimate the emotional gut punch of watching someone who talked openly about life after the show ruthlessly cut their closest partner for money. That immediate feeling of anger, of disrespect, it translates quickly into misplaced votes sometimes. Morgan risks being seen as disloyal, maybe even heartless if she cuts Vince after their relationship developed so intensely. That could potentially lose key loyalty votes, maybe even from someone like Kelly, who might respect the shared game of the duo more than a purely ruthless final cut.
So the strategic calculation, for me, clearly favors Ashley. Morgan has the overwhelming competition resume. By taking Ashley, she removes the risk posed by Vince's ability to pull crucial swing votes like Lauren's, and potentially even Keanu's, if Keanu decides to vote against Vince's cruelty rather than for Morgan's game. The evidence, the likelihood of a landslide win against Ashley is simply too strong to ignore.
The strategic probability is compelling, I do agree, but I maintain that it might be secondary to the perceived narrative and loyalty with this particular jury. Morgan risked everything on this tight bond with Vince. If she breaks it now, right at the finish line, she risks losing the votes of loyalty-focused jurors who respect the narrative of the dominant duo that wrote it out together. Morgan really has to weigh the guaranteed votes against Ashley versus the potential backlash she'll face for sacrificing the integrity of the duo that defined the season.
Yeah, the choice between Vince and Ashley forces Morgan to weigh strategic probability, the hard numbers of the resumes, against the unpredictable forces of jury emotion and loyalty. It really is a decision between winning comfortably, probably, or risking it all for the narrative.
Exactly. And it just underscores the profoundly nuanced and often contradictory nature of jury voting in Big Brother. The decision isn't just about who is the quote-unquote better player, but really about which opponent allows Morgan to articulate the strongest and maybe least offensive path to victory. There's still so much to explore in the final reactions to whatever this monumental final move ends up being.